Welcome to Learn Extra exam revision. Today we're going to look at economics, and we're specifically going to focus on paper 2 and the section on microeconomics. I want to give you a few pointers on how to answer your question paper, and I want us to look at the list of the things that I have compiled. The important thing is that you have to make sure that you know the structure of the exam paper. The exam paper consists of 3 sections. Section A will be your shorter questions. Section B will be on specific topics. And then Section C will be the essay questions. So the important thing is to look at the time allocation and that you make sure that you don't waste time on any of the questions. Each paper consists of 150 marks, and the paper will be a 1.5 hour paper. Section A is a compulsory section, and it consists of 3 questions. Section B consists of 3 questions again. Of these 3 questions, you only have to answer 2. And then Section C will consist of 2 questions, and you choose only one of those essays. Right, I want us to look at some of the exam questions that you can expect from Section A. Keep in mind that in paper 2, there will be 2 topics that will be covered, and we're only looking at microeconomics at the moment, and therefore I have only selected questions from microeconomics. Various possible options are provided as answers to the following questions. Write only the letters A to C next to the question number. Question 1.1.1. The profit maximizing output will always be where A. Average cost equals marginal revenue. B. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. C. Marginal cost equals average revenue. Now the profit maximizing output will be where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And this is something that you have to keep in mind for one of the questions that you will find later on in this paper. So the answer to 1.1.1 is B. 1.1.2. Cost-benefit analysis is a technique for enumerating the total social cost and the total what else associated with an economic project. The answer is benefit, B, income, and C, expense. The correct answer will be A, benefit. One point 1.3, an example of explicit collusion. This means collusion that takes place out in the open where everyone is aware of it. The answer to this one will be B, because a monopoly operates on its own. And an oligopoly doesn't necessarily take part in collusion. One point 1.4. The rationale for a cost-benefit analysis is, in other words, the reason why we do this cost-benefit analysis. A, efficient resource allocation. B, high prices. C, the redistribution of wealth. The answer is A, efficient resource allocation. 1.1.5. I don't meet competition, I crush it. This statement was probably made by a. Now the type of business that would say something like this would be someone who doesn't really have competition, who is in control of the market. A, the options, perfect competitor. B, monetarist. C, monopolist. So the answer has to be C, because the monopolist is the only supplier of this specific product in the market. Then we move on to question 1.2. Give one word or term for each of the following descriptions by choosing a word or a term from the list below. Write only the correct word or term next to the question number. Now in this example, I will just underline the correct answer. First, look at the options that are available before you start answering the question. Social cost, market failure, unregulated, private cost, market structures, oligopoly, and market. Now, question 1.2.1, organizational features of perfect and imperfect market. That refers to market structures. (1.2.2), the mechanism that brings together buyers and sellers of goods and services. Let's look at the options again. The answer here is a market. (1.2.3), an industry dominated by a small number of large firms. Back to the options, the oligopoly will be the correct answer. 1.2.4, a market without any government interference. This market would be unregulated. And then the last one, 1.2.5, the cost that is incurred when an individual or business either produces or consumes something. And because it is attached to a company or to an individual, it will be private cost. When it affects people that are not directly involved in the process, then it would be known as social cost. On to the third section of question 1.3. Choose a description from column B that matches an item in column A. Write only the letter A to I next to the question number. The important thing is to first look at all the different options. So I'm going to read through column A and then I'll read through column B so we can see what all the different options are. In column A, 1.3.1, normal profit. 1.3.2, monopolistic competition. 3, economic profit. 4, cartel. 5, cost-benefit analysis. 6, marginal cost. 7, economies of scale. And 8, merit goods. The options in column B. Communities benefit from this. Now, when I look at that, I can already see, looking back to column A, that merit goods would be the things that communities can benefit from. So 1.3.8, I already know the answer is A. Option B, to determine if the use of resources is economical. To be able to do this determination, a cost-benefit analysis has to be done. So 1.3.5, the answer will be B. C in column B, an increase in production that results in a decrease in long-term average cost. That would be known as economies of scale. So the answer is C. D, some market power through differentiation. Option D in column B, some market power through differentiation. Now, in a situation of monopolistic competition, the products are relatively similar. For instance, if you look at the fast food industry and the manufacturing or the making available of hamburgers, the products are relatively similar, but each one of the suppliers will do something that is a little bit different. So the answer, or D, would be the answer to 1.3.2. Option E, average revenue is bigger or above average cost of production. In a situation like this, economic profit will be made. So 1.3.3, the answer is E. You will remember from the multiple choice questions that we did in 1.1 that there was a question on the cartels, and I said that if oligopolies explicitly work together, then it is known as a cartel. So in other words, 1.3.4, the answer will be F, where you have a formal or an explicit agreement among the competing firms. Then G, the change in total cost when production is increased by one more unit. The moment that you see any indication of one extra unit is added, one extra unit is produced, or the cost changes by one extra unit, then it will definitely have something to do with marginal cost. So 1.3.6, the answer will be G. And the last option, the minimum profit necessary to attract and retain suppliers in a perfectly competitive market. The answer to that would be normal profit, H. That's all for section A. Let's go into an ad break. Welcome back to the show. Let's move on to section B. Right, then we move on to section B, where you have questions that are referring to specific sections in the work. Your question on microeconomics in paper 2 will be question 2 in the paper. I want to give you some tips on answering the questions in section B. The questions must be answered in point form. Even though you answer the questions in point form, it is very important that you answer in full sentences, because if you only write one-word answers, some of the meaning of that answer might go missing. So point number 2 says questions must be answered in full sentences unless stated otherwise. If the question specifically says write only true or false or write only one word, then you should follow that instruction. For each one of the bigger questions, like question 2 or question 3, you have to start on a new page, because when you write your final exam paper, different people will be marking the different question papers, and it would be easier for them to find your question in that paper. Very important with economics, people very easily use abbreviations that are not generally accepted. So be very careful that when you use an abbreviation that you actually explain the abbreviation, or that it is something that is acceptable. When you start writing your answers, make sure that you write as if you are an economist, because that is why you're studying the subject. You have to use subject terminology. For instance, you have to say that economic growth takes place instead of using terms like the economy goes up or the economy goes down. It's important for you to refer back to the notes to see exactly what is expected from you when you have to answer some of these questions. In point 6, for instance, I've listed a few of the typical type of questions that you can expect. When you come across a question like explain, describe, or discuss, it is very important that you make clear the characteristics of something and that you make clear how something works and make use of examples. When you discuss a question, it's always advisable to write a heading, underline the heading, and then start with your explanation. Identify is a similar question to the name question. So you give the name of an idea, a concept, or a person, and you give its essential characteristics. So that will depend on the type of question that you get. Sketch means that you have to draw a diagram. And this, for instance, when I look at the economics paper 1, you might be asked to sketch the economic cycle or the cycle of economic activities. When you are expected to illustrate, you have to draw a diagram or you have to give an example. Very important, when you get the define question, define actually means the precise meaning of something. So you don't necessarily write it in your own words because you have to make use of certain keywords. And that keywords must be subject terminology. Show or demonstrate is a question similar to explain or describe because you are going to make use of examples. Outline. Give the major features or the general principles of a subject, omitting minor details and emphasizing the structure. So you don't have to go in too much detail, but you might have to write a few basic pointers on the specific topic. This is a very important question. Distinguish between or contrast or compare. When you compare, for instance, the characteristics of two different concepts, it is very important that you actually write the exact difference of a specific characteristic. So you will not say, when you have to compare a perfect competitor with that of a monopolist, you will not say that the one consists of only one producer, and in the other one you will mention that it's difficult to enter the market or easy to enter the market. The one would be one producer and the other one would be many producers. So make sure that you distinguish the same characteristic. Important here is to point out or to explain the difference between two or more ideas, objects, concepts, or theories. When you have to tabulate, it is very important that you actually draw a table. That is a specific instruction, and it might be that if you don't carry out that instruction that you are not going to get your marks. Examine, assess, or analyze. This expects you to separate into parts or elements and describe or examine each in detail. This means you have to come up with examples, you have to show the difference between two things, you have to analyze, for instance, the South African economy and look at specific competitors in the economy and how they operate. A few other pointers on answering questions in section B would be to pay attention to the layout and the neatness. Make sure that you leave open lines between your questions, that people can easily read what you are writing. You have to remember that when you write your final paper, it's not your own teacher that knows your handwriting that will be marking that paper. Very important, if you make a mistake, just draw a single line through your work and refrain from scratching out because it doesn't make the paper look very neat. Another important thing that applies to all subjects and all papers, you are not allowed to use Tipp-Ex and you are not allowed to use an erasable pen. And then point 10, do not list or discuss or answer more than the required number because it won't be marked. That means you are asked to list 4 characteristics of a perfect market and you write 5 characteristics. The marker will only look at the first 4 and marks will only be allocated for the first 4. Now we move on to question 2, the actual questions for section B. 2.1 says choose the correct word from those given in brackets. Write only the word next to the question number. Be careful when you read the instructions. If it says write only the word, do not write the entire sentence because it makes it very difficult for the person who has to mark the paper because they're looking for a word and now they have to find the word in the sentence. 2.1.1, the demand curve of a perfect competitor is the same as his marginal revenue or his marginal cost curve. The answer to this one is revenue. When you write the paper, take note that you do not underline on your question paper. You actually have to write out the word. 2.1.2, the greater the differentiation that the producer can create, the more or less price elastic the demand for his product will become. Now you can imagine that if you offer a product that is similar to that of other people, the more you differentiate, it means the more attention you pay to detail, and the more different your product will be from others, the less elastic or price elastic the demand will be, because people would prefer your product because they know that it's a good quality product or that it offers certain characteristics. So when it becomes less price elastic, it means that a change in the price of that product would not have a huge influence on the demand for that product. Two point two. Read the following text and answer the questions that follow. All South African construction majors involved in collusion price fixing. This was said by Minister Patel. I'm not going to read through the whole article, but I do want to stress that this relates to price fixing in a market where there's only a few major suppliers of or major construction companies in the country. And according to Economic Development Minister Ibrahim Patel, major South African civil engineering and construction companies currently active in the sector have been involved in infrastructure-related collusion and price fixing. Obviously, it is a huge problem, and they refer to the result of this price fixing and how it affects people. And I'm going to underline the important words here. The state reportedly lost billions of rands through large-scale collusion. Now, the repercussions of the state losing money through this large-scale collusion is that if they don't get the taxes that they are supposed to get during the process of production, they will also not have money available to support social grants, for instance. Then further down in the article, they refer to some of the projects that was affected by this collusion. For instance, the train project and several stadium developments. Now that would probably refer to 2010 and the World Cup soccer stadiums that were built. Another important thing that they refer to in the article is the fact that in certain cases of critical projects, in other words, those things that were important for the country to continue to function, some companies actually admitted that they took part in this process of collusion, which means that they can actually be prosecuted. So according to the minister, they received 400 admissions of incidents of collusion. But the shocking part of this situation is that a lot of these businesses belong to the South African Council for the Project and Construction Management Professions. Professor Raymond Nkadu was shocked that registered individual members of this institution had been found to have been involved. And you will see that there's a question based on this a little bit later. I'm going to read the last paragraph. As a council, we have decided that we might take additional disciplinary action against these individuals, he said. Now, the questions based on this article. (2.2.1) indicate the form of competition that exists between major South African civil engineering and construction companies. The answer to this would be oligopolist. Now, what would be some of the reasons, question 2.2.2, why we have a competition policy? Now, the important thing here is that you want competition in your economy, because when there is competition, it means that best quality is developed and prices are actually kept down. It also means that different businesses have a fair chance to take part in the economy. So I'm going to write down a few of the key words. Very important. There must be fair competition. Everyone must have a fair chance to take part in the economy. Better products or services. And lower prices. 2.2.3. Explain why Professor Raymond Nkadu said he was shocked that registered individual members of the SACP-CMP had been found to have been involved. The important thing here is that you expect that people that belong to a professional body would be professional. And collusion is against the law of the country. So that would not be professional behavior. So I'm just going to make a note here. They are expected to be professional. (2.2.4) Identify the negative externalities suffered as a result of this price fixing. I'm going to underline the term negative externalities. Negative externalities means, or let's start with the term externalities. That means anyone outside this transaction that is affected directly or indirectly by this transaction. In this case, negative externalities. Now, because they colluded and they manipulated the prices of the products, they managed to get the business for themselves, and they didn't necessarily pay all the taxes that they were supposed to, and the company made the money, but the government didn't necessarily get all the taxes. So if the government didn't get all the taxes that they were entitled to, they lost billions of rands, and as a result of that, they didn't have money to pay as many social benefits to people, for instance. So it affects the nation. Moving on to question 2.3. In this question, you have to study a graph and you have to answer some questions on it. Let's look at the graph and the important points highlighted on this graph. What I see is different prices that I'm going to circle. A price of 60 Rand, I see a price of 40 Rand, I see a quantity of 300, and I see different important points. Now we all know that the point of optimum production would be that point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And I'm going to draw a line through marginal revenue, so you can see this is the marginal revenue curve. And this is the marginal cost curve. Let's look at the questions. 2.3.1. Identify the point of optimum production where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So it would be point A. Describe the nature of the product supplied. Now, when we go back to the graph, we see that this is the market demand for a product. And the market demand for a product is regulated by the monopolist. So in this case, the product that is supplied by a monopolist will usually be a very unique product with very few or no substitutes. Right, then question 2.3.3, indicate whether the firm is making economic profit or economic loss, and you have to do the calculations. Now, as I've indicated earlier, the price that the product is sold at is 60 Rand. The cost of the product would be 40 Rand. And this entire area is the area of economic profit. Now later on we're going to look at an essay where you have to indicate whether a business makes economic profit or not, and take care that you actually highlight the area so that it's clear that you know where the economic profit is made. To do the calculation, we are going to do the following. We're going to take the average revenue minus average cost, and that will give us profit. But we also have to keep in mind that the quantity produced is 300 units. So your average revenue is 60 minus 40, and your profit will be, they don't indicate the units, but we assume that it's going to be Rand. The important thing that you have to remember is that this is only per unit. Because they sell 300 units, you have to take my answer and you have to multiply it by 300 units, and that will come down to 6,000 Rand. So the economic profit equals 6,000 Rand. Let's just go back to the question. It says indicate whether the firm is making economic profit or economic loss. Show your calculations. So in my answer, I've only indicated the calculations. It is also important that you write the company has made economic profit. Then question 2.4. Discuss the immobility of the factors of production as one of the causes of market failure. So now towards the end of each one of these questions on a section in the textbook, you will find 2 8-mark questions towards the end. So question 2.4 is your first 8-mark question. Usually you have to write down 4 facts for 2 marks each. Discuss the immobility of the factors of production as one of the causes of market failure. Now, what would the term market failure refer to? It refers to a situation where the market cannot meet the demands of the consumer. I'm showing you the solutions, and because they refer to, the important thing that I want to actually underline here is the factors of production and the immobility thereof. So in your answer, you can really just list the factors of production and discuss how some of these factors of production are immobile in certain situations. And this is what your answer should look like. Most markets do not adjust rapidly to the changes in the demand and supply. And as you can see, what I've written here was I've looked at the factors of production, labor, physical capital, and certain structural changes that takes place in the economy. And now, how will this result in market failure? What we have to remember about labor, for instance, a person as an individual is not that mobile, especially if the person is involved with a family. So it's going to be very difficult to move labor from one area to another. It can only happen over a period of time, and in certain cases it cannot happen at all. So geographically, it would mean that, let's say for instance, your manager tells you that as from tomorrow you will work in a different city. That would not be physically possible because you have a house and you have a family, you have children at school, and it's going to take a period of time to actually make that change. Unskilled workers would be another example. There are lots of unskilled workers available, but the problem is with skilled workers, and skilled workers are usually qualified in a specific field. So you cannot tell a teacher of maths, for instance, that as from tomorrow he will have to teach life sciences, because he's a bit immobile because he's specialized in a specific field. With regards to physical capital refers to infrastructure, buildings, etc. These things are relatively immobile. You can't just easily move a piece of land or a factory. You can maybe, over a period of time, build a new factory in a different location. It's also very difficult to move large machinery. So that means it becomes very immobile. The concept of structural changes refers to how changes takes place in the economy. Over a period of time, the importance of the different sectors have changed in the economy. Initially, the primary sector used to play the biggest role in the economy. Over a period of time, with the development of the secondary sector became more important, and then with the development of transport and communication and financial services, for instance, the tertiary sector grew quite extensively, and at the moment the tertiary sector makes the largest contribution to the economy. The answer here, it's a demand for some products may increase and others may decrease, and technology may change. That is also applicable to people being replaced by machinery. Let's look at question 2.5. Discuss the long-term equilibrium for the industry and the individual businesses in a perfect market. I'm showing you the solution, but first I want us to look at the graph. Because you operate in a perfect market, you are seen as a price taker. So the price taker will take the price that is determined by the perfect market. Now, in the perfect market, prices are determined by the interaction of demand and supply. So I'm drawing a line on the demand curve and a line on the supply curve. And the equilibrium, or the market price, would then be P1. Now, as an individual supplier of the product operating in the perfect market, you do not have any control over the price, which means that you have to sell your product at that specific price determined by the market. In this case, it will be P1. So take note that on the left-hand side graph, you see the industry, and on the right-hand side graph, you see the individual firm. So the price is literally just taken by the individual firm. He has to sell his products at P1, and I'm going to indicate it here, P1, and that means that for the individual firm, average revenue would equal marginal revenue. Now, the important thing is, at this point, as I've indicated to you earlier in a discussion, if economic profit can actually be made in the perfect market in the short run. But what happens as a result of this economic profit, it actually draws more competition. So the individual supplier might be willing to supply more of a product because he sees the opportunity to make economic profit, but there might also be people outside that see the opportunities and now enter the market. And as a result of them entering the market, there will be an increase in the supply of the product. When you see an increase in supply, you actually see the market supply moving to the right or outward. And if you know your normal demand and supply curve and the interaction between demand and supply, what happens when there is an increase in supply is there will be a drop in the price of the product. Again, the individual producer or supplier or firm in the market has no control over the price. Because the price drops, the individual firm will now have to sell his product at P1, which is the market price determined by the market. And at this point, only normal profit will be made. So if you look at the initial price and you look at the new price, you can see that there's a difference between economic profit and normal profit. The important fact that you have to remember about this is that in the short term, the individual firm in the perfect market can make supernormal or economic profit, but in the long run, only normal profit can be made. I want us to just look at the discussion, the explanation on it. If most firms are making economic profits in the short run, so again, as I mentioned, economic profit and short run, there will be an increase in the output of existing firms. So those people who are already in the market would want to use the opportunity to increase their profits. So existing firms would produce more, but you can also expect to see entry of new firms. Firms are responding to the profit motive and the supernormal profit. That is just another term, as I said, for economic profit. So I want to underline the term supernormal profit. People will react to the opportunity as a signal for a reallocation of resources. That means currently I am using my resources to offer a certain service or a certain product. But there is an opportunity to make more profit in a different area. And I might take my resources and use it differently. The addition of the new supplies causes an outward shift. The outward shift refers to the increase in supply that I indicated here. And this is shown in the diagram below. The rest of the discussion, making the assumption that the market demand curve remains unchanged. So the reason why we say that is we have the original supply curve of MS. We have a new supply curve of MS2. But take note that there has not been any changes in the demand curve. The demand curve remained exactly the same. So even though more of this product or this service is available, it doesn't mean that the consumer need more of this product or this service. So we make the assumption that the market demand curve remains unchanged, so people don't purchase more of the product. As a result of the higher market supply, it will reduce the equilibrium market price until the price equals the long run average cost. If I go back to the graph, I can show you the average cost is indicated in this area. Let me just make it. So the price would drop to this point. Where the price is equal to the long run average cost. At this point, each firm is making normal profit only. Now, normal profit is what is necessary to keep businesses operating in a specific market. If they don't make normal profit, they would not be willing to make available the product. There's no further incentive for movement of firms in and out of the industry, and a long-run equilibrium has been established. That means there won't be new people or businesses entering the market, and the existing suppliers won't necessarily leave the market unless they find an opportunity to make supernormal or economic profit. The entry of new firms shift the market supply curve to MS2, as I indicated, to the right, and it drives down the market price to P2. This I've indicated on the graph already. So new supply curve and a new price. There's the new supply curve. There's the new price. There's no incentive for firms to enter or leave the industry, thus a long-term equilibrium is established. That's all for section B. Let's go to an ad break. Welcome back. Let's look at the question from section C. On my question paper, I've numbered this as question 3. In your question paper, it will be the first question in section C will be the one based on microeconomics. Pure monopolies seldom exist, although we often find characteristics of a monopoly present in a business. Discuss the monopoly as a market structure and draw a fully labeled graph to illustrate profit for the monopolist. Now in this question, you can clearly see the difference between the main part and the additional part, because section C will usually consist of a question made up of 2 parts. The very important thing about writing this question is that you must start with an introduction. Looking at this question, they mention pure monopolies, they mention characteristics, they want you to discuss the monopoly as a market structure, and they clearly indicate that this is worth 26 marks. And then the second part, which would be known as the additional part of the essay, you have to draw a graph explaining profit of the monopolist, and that would be worth 10 marks. So profit for the monopolist. Let's move on to the solution for this question. Firstly, how to approach the essays. Longer response takes different formats, so you have to look at the question. They might, for instance, ask you to write a letter to the Minister of Finance to give him some advice on a certain topic. Then it's very important that your response would be in the form of a letter, and there will be marks awarded for the format. So that is quite important. In this question, it's just a normal essay where you have to start with an introduction. You can actually write the heading introduction, because it will make it very clear to the person that's marking the paper that this is the introduction. The introduction will usually be a definition of the topic that you are going to discuss. You can answer your essay in point form, but the very important thing is that it must be in full sentences. A lot of meaning can go lost in the process if you write short phrases or just one-word answers. So what I would suggest, and it makes it much easier for the person who is marking the essay, but also for you as the one that is writing the essay, to start with a heading that you will underline. Then you will write your discussion, and it's always advisable to write an example where it is at all possible. As I did when I read the question, I would advise you to underline the keywords in the question to make sure that you cover all the aspects required. Because sometimes I would say write the advantages and the disadvantages and the characteristics, and you start writing and you leave out some of those important elements. As I indicate here, the introduction you can write as a heading. Everyone knows that after the introduction, the body will follow. So you are not expected to write a heading that says that you will be discussing the body. Also very important, when you write the introduction, don't tell us that you will be discussing the following topic. Everyone knows that you will be discussing the topic. You start off with the actual facts. Then you end off your essay by writing a conclusion. And this you can also write as a heading, because it indicates to the marker that you are well aware of the format of the essay. And the function of the conclusion is to sum up the main point. So if you had to discuss the functions of a specific aspect, or let's say the function of the state in the economy, or the contribution of the state in the economy, at some point you might be expected to evaluate the success of the state in providing certain goods and services. Then your conclusion would be something in the region of, from our discussion, it became clear that the government does provide or does not provide proper services in the economy. Back to our specific essay that we have to discuss, I would suggest that you start with something like a definition of the monopoly. The monopoly is a market structure where only one seller, so the keyword one seller would definitely have to be present in your discussion. Only one seller or producer operates. Entry is blocked and the product has no close substitute. You don't have to write all the detail about the monopoly in the introduction or in the definition, because you will elaborate on the topic a little later. You might want to break down your discussion in such a way that it is easy for the marker to find the facts. Nothing prevents you from doing this in a table format, as you can see in this example. So what are the characteristics of the monopoly that most of you should know by now? The number of businesses, these would be the different aspects that you're going to discuss in your left-hand side column, and this would be the facts based on the monopoly specifically. You could do a similar thing for the oligopoly or for the perfect market, because the number of businesses, the nature of products, entry into the market, those type of things would differ between the different markets or market structures. Number of businesses, as we all know by now, the monopoly will usually be one supplier, and as a result of the fact that it's only one supplier, he is completely aware of everything that's going on in the market because he controls the market, and therefore he is known as a price maker, because he can influence the price and he can decide at what price he wants to sell his product. The nature of the product, the type of product, when you are the sole owner of a specific resource and you are the only person who has the right, for instance, to make available a certain product or a service, you have control over it. That means that your product must be unique. In other words, other people cannot copy it, or they don't have access to the resources to be able to manufacture that product. Entry into the market, because there are certain restrictions. For instance, this person has a license to provide the product. This person is the sole owner of the natural resource. It is very difficult to enter the market. It's actually impossible to enter this market. So it says here that entry under monopolistic conditions is entirely blocked. As this business is the only supplier, or the monopolist is the only supplier of the product, he has complete control over the prices. So considerable control over the prices of their products, and as we mentioned earlier, they are price makers. In a perfect market, information is available to everyone. Everyone is aware of the price of the product, the availability of the product. In the imperfect market, that is the exact opposite. You don't have complete information about the market, and that is what gives some businesses the competitive advantage. As the monopolist, because you are the only supplier of the product and you control the market, you know exactly what is going on in the market, and therefore we say that there's no uncertainty regarding the market information. You know what is available, you know what price you are selling it at, and you control the market. The demand curve of the monopolist is a downward sloping demand curve. Remember from our discussion earlier on, where I showed you the relation between the market demand and the demand of the individual firm in the market. He has to take the price. He doesn't have any control over the prices. But the demand curve in the monopoly is a downward sloping demand curve, and it equals the demand in the market, because I'm the only supplier. I actually am the market. I control it. And that also reflects the total supply, because I'm the only owner of the natural resource, or I'm the only person who has a license to provide that product in a certain area. In the long run, the monopolist has the possibility to make economic profit. And the reason for that is due to the fact that there are no competitors entering the market. So the market supply will not suddenly increase because there are other suppliers who see the opportunity to make supernormal profit. No competitors entering the market over the long run. The economic profit remains over the long term. Remember, I mentioned that in the perfect market, you can only make economic profit in the short run. In the long run, it will be moved down to only normal profit. Seller market power. The monopolist is a price maker, as we've mentioned before. So he decides what price he's going to sell his product at. Technical efficiency, it's possible for the monopoly to actually, or the monopolist, to reach technical efficiency. And then the last point, allocative efficiency. No allocative efficiency regarding the monopoly, because the monopoly, as the sole owner of the license or the sole owner of the natural resource, would not be interested in taking his resources elsewhere because he controls the market. Moving on to the second part of the essay. The additional part of the question asked you to indicate the economic profit of the monopolist. Very important, when you draw a graph like this, you have to make sure that you indicate the labels properly on the graph. So on your vertical axis, you put price, horizontal axis indicate the quantity. Make sure that you indicate your average revenue curve, marginal revenue curve, marginal cost curve, as well as your average cost curve. And then the most important part would be to indicate that the economic profit will happen in this area. And then you can also have a look at how the mark allocation works, so that you can see exactly what is important and what the marks are allocated for. And that's the end of our discussion on microeconomics. Choose only one of those essays. Right, I want us to look at some of the exam questions that you can expect from section A. Keep in mind that in paper 2, there will be 2 topics that will be covered, and we're only looking at microeconomics at the moment, and therefore I have only selected questions from microeconomics. Various possible options are provided as answers to the following questions. Write only the letters A to C next to the question number. Question 1.1.1. The profit maximizing output will always be where A. Average cost equals marginal revenue. B. Marginal cost equals marginal revenue. C. Marginal cost equals average revenue. Now the profit maximizing output will be where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And this is something that you have to keep in mind for one of the questions that you will find later on in this paper. So the answer to 1.1.1 is B. 1.1.2. Cost-benefit analysis is a technique for enumerating the total social cost and the total what else associated with an economic project. The answer is benefit, B, income, and C, expense. The correct answer will be Welcome to Learn Extra exam revision. Today we're going to look at economics, and we're specifically going to focus on paper 2 and the section on microeconomics. I want to give you a few pointers on how to answer your question paper, and I want us to look at the list of the things that I have compiled. The important thing is that you have to make sure that you know the structure of the exam paper. The exam paper consists of 3 sections. Section A will be your shorter questions. Section B will be on specific topics. And then section C will be the essay questions. So the important thing is to look at the time allocation and that you make sure that you don't waste time on any of the questions. Each paper consists of 150 marks, and the paper will be a 1.5 hour paper. Section A is a compulsory section, and it consists of 3 questions. Section B consists of 3 questions again. Of these 3 questions, you only have to answer 2. And then section C will consist of 2 questions, and you A, benefit. 1.1.3, an example of explicit collusion. This means collusion that takes place out in the open where everyone is aware of it. The answer to this one will be B, because a monopoly operates on its own. And an oligopoly doesn't necessarily take part in collusion. 1.1.4. The rationale for a cost-benefit analysis is, in other words, the reason why we do this cost-benefit analysis. A, efficient resource allocation. B, high prices. C, the redistribution of wealth. The answer is A, efficient resource allocation. 1.1.5. I don't meet competition, I crush it. This statement was probably made by a. Now, the type of business that would say something like this would be someone who doesn't really have competition, who is in control of the market. A, the options, perfect competitor. B, monetarist. C, monopolist. So the answer has to be C, because the monopolist is the only supplier of this specific product in the market. 4, a market without any government interference. This market would be unregulated. And then the last one, 1.2.5, the cost that is incurred when an individual or business either produces or consumes something. And because it is attached to a company or to an individual, it will be private cost. When it affects people that are not directly involved in the process, then it would be known as social cost. On to the third section of question 1.3. Choose a description from column B that matches an item in column A. Write only the letter A to I next to the question number. The important thing is to first look at all the different options. So I'm going to read through column A and then I'll read through column B so we can see what all the different options are. In column A, 1.3.1, normal profit. 1.3.2, monopolistic competition. 3, economic profit. 4, cartel. 5, cost-benefit analysis. Then we move on to question 1.2. Give one word or term for each of the following descriptions by choosing a word or a term from the list below. Write only the correct word or term next to the question number. Now, in this example, I will just underline the correct answer. First, look at the options that are available before you start answering the question. Social cost, market failure, unregulated, private cost, market structures, oligopoly, and market. Now, question 1.2.1, organizational features of perfect and imperfect market. That refers to market structures. (1.2.2), the mechanism that brings together buyers and sellers of goods and services. Let's look at the options again. The answer here is a market. (1.2.3), an industry dominated by a small number of large firms. Back to the options, the oligopoly will be the correct answer. 1.2.4,